If you've ever spent hundreds or sometimes even thousands of dollars on lab testing, hoping for answers, this episode is definitely for you. And welcome to the Health Filter. This is the series where we take health information, health trends, claims, and run them through a critical thinking lens. My goal is not to tell you what to do, it's to help you to better understand your physiology, to maybe think in systems rather than silos, and ultimately make more informed decisions about your health. And functional lab testing, in particular, is one area where critical thinking is especially important. Definitely over the past several years, testing has for sure exploded in popularity. There's gut testing, GI mapping, hormone testing, the Dutch test. There's different food sensitivity type testing. We have organic acids testing, hair tissue mineral analysis, that sort of thing. And while some of these tests can be for sure helpful, others can leave you with this binder full of information, definitely a lighter wallet, and absolutely no more clarity than when you got started. So today I wanted to explore a simple question, and that is, when does testing create clarity for you, and when does it just create more confusion? Because in my experience, the question isn't actually whether testing works. The question is whether we're asking the right question at the right time. So let's start with why functional testing has become so popular in the first place. The reality is that many people just they feel stuck. They've been told their blood work is normal and they feel anything but normal. They're feeling exhausted. Their digestion is off. They're struggling with their energy, they poor sleep quality, poor recovery. Their weight is changing. They have brain fog and any other number of hormonal symptoms, and they're just looking for answers. And testing can feel super attractive because it appears to be this objective kind of measure. It feels like they're finally going to uncover this missing piece of information. And in a culture that loves optimization, more data can feel empowering. But here's the first filter I want you to apply: more information does not automatically create better decisions. In fact, sometimes more information creates more confusion because information without context is simply noise. So before any test is ordered, I think there's one question that should be asked first, and that is, what am I actually trying to learn? Not what test should I get, but what do I want from it? And when we get to what question am I trying to answer, that's when testing works best because it's trying to solve a specific problem. Think about it this way. So, a flashlight is incredibly useful when you're looking for something specific. It's much less useful when you're just like shining it into every corner randomly and just hoping something jumps out at you. And so that same thing happens with lab testing. In my opinion, testing becomes most valuable when these four concepts are true. So, first, you want that clear question, like I mentioned. And second, the results should change what you do. So, should change the protocol that you have lined out for you. Third, you want those results to change your behavior because information is only valuable if you're willing to do something with that information. And fourth, the findings actually match the clinical picture. In other words, the data supports what we're seeing in the person that we're running the test on. So, when is testing actually useful? Typically, it's when symptoms are persistent, The foundational habits have been addressed, they're doing the work already, and you're still not getting the results that you need. So, for example, if someone has ongoing digestive symptoms, bloating, gas, constipation, diarrhea, abnormal or abdominal discomfort, food reactions that haven't improved despite working on nutrition, um, their sleep, their stress management, their hydration, other lifestyle factors have been addressed, then maybe the test can provide some guide for intervention. Hormone testing may be useful when someone is experiencing significant symptoms such as irregular cycles, severe PMS, maybe unexplained fatigue, low libido, mood changes, difficulty recovering from exercise, or just other symptoms tied to hormonal fluctuations. And testing can also provide additional context when symptoms don't seem to match what standard lab work is showing. The common thread is this: there is a question, there's a reason for the test, and the results have the potential to influence that next step. Now, compare that to someone who feels generally well but decides to run every test available because they're afraid they're missing that one piece of information. They're just like looking, and that's where things can become more complicated, because the more markers you look at, the more likely you're going to find something that appears abnormal. And not everything abnormal is actually meaningful. One of the biggest mistakes I see is what I call the fishing expedition. So that's testing without a hypothesis, ordering tests simply to see what comes up. The problem is that bodies are complex. If you search hard enough, you're going to find something. The question is whether what you found actually matters. The second mistake is just data overload. Many functional tests generate just like pages and pages of information. And while that can look impressive, more pages doesn't necessarily equal more insight overall. And sometimes people leave with like 20 abnormalities and no idea which one actually deserves the attention, actually deserves that to be addressed. The third mistake is just like a false certainty. A test result can create the illusion that we've found this root cause. But a lab marker is not a diagnosis. It's simply a clue, a piece of information, one part of a much larger story. And finally, there's just this loss of context. This is the systems thinking piece that I think gets missed most often. Lab values don't exist in isolation. Hormones influence metabolism, stress influences your digestion, sleep influences your hormones, nutrition influences all of it. The body is one interconnected system, and looking at a single marker without understanding the larger landscape can lead us down the wrong path, which brings me to what I think is one of the most overlooked conversations in the functional health space, and that's testing readiness. Because before we ask whether someone should invest in testing, I think we should be asking, is the ecosystem, is the system ready to be assessed? Over the years, I've seen people spend, like I said, thousands of dollars on testing before they've consistently address things like sleep, protein intake, energy availability, stress management, movement. And I've also seen testing be incredibly valuable when those foundations were in place and we just needed another piece of the puzzle. And that's an important distinction because testing isn't inherently the answer. It's simply another tool. And tools work best when they're used at the right time. If you're sleeping 5 hours a night, skipping meals, chronically stressed, chronically under eating, and struggling to recover, testing may tell you way less than you think. And that's because the body responds to all of those inputs. Your stress influences your hormones, your sleep affects your blood sugar regulation, your recovery capacity. Under eating impacts metabolism and your energy availability. Recovery influences your systemic inflammation. And the markers we see on a test don't exist independently from the life that you're living. Sometimes what looks like a hormone problem is actually an energy availability problem. What looks like a gut problem may be heavily influenced by chronic stress. And what looks like a recovery issue might be rooted in just like really poor sleep. So before we go searching for more information, we need to ask, have we stabilized the foundations enough to understand what the data is actually telling us? Because sometimes we need to stabilize the system before we even assess. Sometimes, all the time, we need to have that stability before we assess the system. And I know that's not a very exciting answer. It's far more exciting to order that next test than it is to consistently eat breakfast, prioritize protein, strength train, improve your sleep, get outside, and create more capacity in your nervous system. But if those foundations are shaky, it is often difficult to know whether a lab finding is truly driving the symptom or simply reflecting a body that's adapting to chronic stress, to unmet physiological needs. If you're considering functional testing, I would pause and ask yourself 4 questions. What am I trying to answer? What question do I have? What would I do differently if the result is positive? And what will I do differently if the result is negative? And will this result actually change my next step? Because if the answer to those questions is nothing, then the test may not be providing any value right now. Sometimes the most impactful interventions are also often the least exciting. Eating enough protein, not very exciting. Strength training consistently, progressively, not very exciting. Managing stress, not very exciting. Improving your sleep, building daily habits, all not very exciting. Many of the symptoms that people are experiencing are not caused by a lack of testing. They're often caused by a lack of recovery, capacity, nourishment, or just consistency in general. Testing may help to identify obstacles, but it rarely replaces the fundamentals. Functional testing isn't inherently good or bad. It is simply a tool. And like any tool, its value depends on how it is being used. The goal is never just to simply collect more data. The goal is to create more clarity, because sometimes the next best step can be a test. And sometimes the next best step is applying what you already know. If you enjoyed this episode of The Health Filter, I'd love it if you subscribe for more conversations that help you to think critically about health information, understanding your physiology, and again, to make more informed decisions about your wellness. So make sure you hit that subscribe button and share if you think this is meaningful. Thanks.